also address this concern that we have for rising costs of legal services that the Minister addressed in respect of Part 1. Because, as we've heard from the prior Speaker, Stuart Nash, this Part 2 of the bill sets out the mechanisms to gauge when legal aid should or should not be granted. And the Minister who, in his contribution on the first part, said that there is an expectation that the costs in the legal aid system are going to increase. Now, there are two drivers of that. If there are more people getting legal aid for mainly criminal matters, which is where one of the big... No more people getting them for... That's flatlined, is it?
I wouldn't say quite flatlined.
Flatlined, but still going up. It's not going up quite as fast as the rate of crime, but still going up a little bit. Yeah. Well, yeah. Thank you, Minister. But in respect of both so I'm sure that part of it is just the increase in some sorts of crime, particularly serious violent crime, is on the increase, and that will have a flow through to legal aid costs, and that's obviously of concern. And the underlying way to deal with that is, of course, not through legal aid legislation, but it's through better interventions earlier in life so as to reduce the rate of offending. But in respect of civil legal aid, this is another area which is of concern to the opposition, because it is plain that the cost of living is rising for most New Zealanders, and it's not just petrol prices, and I admit that petrol prices are largely beyond the control of the government, but except for the GST increase, that's right. But in respect of most other cost increases, the government does have to accept some responsibility. 2 years into government, 2 years, two budgets, and the... If they've done their public transport the way that they should have.
Order. We're on Part 2 of the legal services.
But the point that's being made, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and the point that I will come back to is that if these costs aren't being met by the legal aid system, this is actually yet another area of cost where cost will be being transferred from New Zealanders or to New Zealanders from the state. So the cost of living pressures on New Zealanders will be getting worse as a consequence of more of the total amount that's required to be spent on legal services in New Zealand being met by the individuals and less by the government. And I'm not, as you all have heard from earlier contributions, saying that all legal services ought to be funded by the Crown, not at all. But I do have a fear that the cost of living pressures that are being borne by people from increased electricity prices through to legal services is something that we on this side of the House are concerned about. So, Mr. Speaker, I would be interested to learn from the Minister that when it comes to these clauses 10 and 11, which set out when legal aid may be granted in civil matters, whether the income thresholds are going to be lifted so as to reflect the fact that cost of living through inflation, wage growth, and we want to make sure that New Zealanders are in a position to effectively resolve their disputes through civil methods. I mean, one of the reasons why we have courts is to stop people using uncivil methods of settling their disputes. If they don't have access to court processes, they're more likely to have resort to fisticuffs or employing some standover tactics in order to resolve their disputes. So the importance of civil proceedings and maintaining civil society is not to be underestimated. And for that to be a real avenue for people to resolve their disputes, they have to be able to access justice, as Grant Robertson said in an early intervention. So we are interested in whether the fact that wages aren't rising as fast as inflation, that people are facing an increase in the cost of living that's not reflected by their earnings. And putting aside, that's average earnings, and for the people who are unlucky enough to be made unemployed through redundancy, following the earthquake, for a small proportion of those people for whom we feel very sorry, but before the earthquake and no doubt after the earthquake from other causes elsewhere in the country, those people need to be able to rely upon legal aid properly covering their costs. Otherwise, they will not be able to access justice, and without that, they will suffer injustice, which is something that this Parliament ought to be concerned about. So, Mr. Chairman, In respect of part 2, I do invite the Minister to address parts